All right, but speaking of Joe Biden, he did an interview with Lawrence O'Donnell last night. It was also just sort of like, look, this is an interview. I can just tell you, there's no inside information here. I'm just looking at this as a former director and as someone who watches a lot of news. This is a set that has been constructed to make it look like Joe Biden has been president for 2 years. The lighting is much more yellow and moody than you will get in other things. The idea is to make it seem like he is in the this is like a fireside chat type of situation back from FDR on some level. I mean, just from a lighting perspective, more often than not, these things are more well lit, a little bit brighter when you see these interviews. The idea is also, I think they probably, the Biden people probably said, tone down the lighting a little bit. We don't want anything that looks too harsh. And, you know, look, this may work. You may be able to do this. You know, how many years was it the FDR was, you know, more or less immobile and they hid it from the U.S. public?
Slightly different media environment, though.
It's true. But also maybe less sophisticated in terms of their ability to manipulate these things.
Deep fake Joe through the 4 years.
I think maybe all they're looking to do is 9 months. But here is Joe Biden talking about the Iraq War, he's asked. And look, we're going to then go to a series of clips that Mehdi Hassan put together for The Intercept. We've played, I think, all of these clips in the past anyway, separately, but he just put one out that was, you know, the issue is not that Joe Biden has gaffes, although that's true. The issue is not that Joe Biden has lost a step, which I think is undeniable, certainly by the reporters who have covered him that have expressed it in, you know, off-the-record situations. But one of the issues is that he is a fabulist. I mean, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he doesn't know he's lying. He wants the truth to be something else. But I lived through this era. I knew where Joe Biden was on Iraq. Here he is telling a slightly different version of what happened in 2002, 2003, 2004.
Killed yesterday in Iraq. You say that your vote on the Iraq War was based on the President Bush's representations, that this wasn't about going to war. It was about presenting a clear, at least, threat to Saddam Hussein. Bernie Sanders says, I saw right through that. I was right. I knew what George Bush was up to. When we look back on it, can we say that Senator Sanders' judgment about that was better than yours?
Look, the reason I voted the way I did was to try to prevent a war from happening because, remember, the threat was to go to war. The argument was because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So he said that I need to be able to get the Security Council to agree to send in inspectors to put pressure on Saddam to find out whether or not he's producing nuclear weapons. And at the time, I said, that's your reason. All right, I get it. That was the rationale was that's the way to not go to war, because I didn't believe he had those nuclear weapons. I didn't believe he had those weapons of mass destruction. And you may remember the debates we had after that period about when Colin said, anyway. So that was the rationale. What happened was we went in, determined.
Pause it for 1 second. When Colin said what he was talking about was Colin Powell went in front of the United Nations, held up a vial of talcum powder and said, you know, this is next, anthrax. Larry Wilkinson, who was Colin Powell's second, said that he knew going into that speech where the CIA director at the time, I can't remember his name now, was sitting right behind Colin Powell at the UN. He knew this was a crap show. He knew they were lying on behalf of the administration.
And you may remember the debates we had after that period about when Colin said, anyway. So that was the rationale. What happened was we went in, determined that they hyped what in fact was occurring. They didn't. There was no concrete proof of what he was doing, and they still went to war. And the irony of all ironies is the first thing that Barack Obama did when we got elected president and vice president was turn to me and say, end the war. Not a joke. You run the deal to bring out 150,000+ combat troops from Iraq. And I did. So, you know, the idea that I took the word of a president saying that he wasn't going to go to war and this was the way to avoid going to war was, in fact, a mistake. It was a mistake. I've acknowledged that 15 years ago. But the idea that Bernie Sanders' judgment on foreign policy is superior to mine, I find I'm anxious to debate him on that question.
Well, you don't need to debate him on that question. You just did. You just did. And after that long filibuster, you swung all the way around and said, yes, it was a mistake. I did not have the same judgment of Bernie Sanders at that time. I'll tell you who else you didn't have the same judgment as. Nancy Pelosi, who also knew what you say you knew. There was no nuclear weapons there. There was no mass weapons of mass destruction. Nancy Pelosi, let's pull up her vote. Nancy Pelosi voted against that same resolution. Many people did. Not tons. 133 in Congress, almost exclusively Democrats. I think there was probably one or two. I bet you, Walter Jones from North Carolina at the time was one of those guys who might have voted against it. Biden voted yes. But there were others who said no. If Joe Biden really believed that. But here's the problem with what Joe Biden is saying. He's also lying that 15 years ago he said it was a mistake. The war was launched. Well, 15 years ago, first of all, was 2 years after the war had started. And the idea, though, that he thought that he was just voting to leverage to stop the war.
I was calling their bluff.
Yeah, I was calling what he was doing was, the weapons inspectors went in. They looked at all the sites that the CIA had told them. They said, there's nothing here. Tell us where they are. Tell us where they are, they kept saying. Tell us where they are. And then after a couple of weeks, after I think it was maybe 6 to 8 weeks, the Bush administration just said, you know what, just get out in 24 hours because we're going to bomb the hell out of everything. Sorry, couldn't find it. We don't want this to go on too much longer. It's going to be obvious we were lying. But let's go here. Mehdi Hassan has pulled the clips to see where Joe Biden was in 1998. And this is a clip of him talking to Scott Ritter, I believe it is, who was a weapons inspector, saying it's not in there. They don't have it. Now, 98 was a little bit earlier, obviously, before this. But then we'll see a clip of Joe Biden 4 months after shock and awe, when we've invaded the country, to see how much regret he has that the Bush administration went to war then.
It's pure misrepresentation. Then there's Iraq, where the former vice president says he only voted for the war because the Bush administration tricked him.
I made a mistake. I said it 14 years ago. I trusted George Bush to keep his word. He said he was not going to go into Iraq.
Except Biden was calling for war with Saddam Hussein in 1998.
The only way we're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and it's going to require guys like you in uniform to be back on foot in the desert, taking taking Saddam down.
He also says now that he opposed the Iraq war as soon as it started.
From the moment shock and awe started, from that moment, I was opposed to the effort and I was outspoken.
A complete fabrication. Here he is several months after the invasion began, praising both the war and George Bush.
Some of my own party have said that it was a mistake to go to Iraq in the first place. But the cost of not acting against Saddam, I think, would have been much greater. The President of the United States is a bold leader, and he is popular.
Again, Biden just makes stuff up.
5 months after shock and awe, 5 months after shock and awe, he is still saying that going to war was the right move to do. He was praising George W. Bush. I want to see that debate. But we don't have to. We just witness it. The largest foreign policy failure of this country in 50 years. And he was 100% wrong. And now he's lying about it after the fact. What more debate do you need? How much of what we're dealing with today is a function of that call by Joe Biden? I mean, give me a break. Give me a break.
Do you think there's any way to get this information out to people?
I'm not sure that people
he can just say whatever he wants and people will believe him.
I don't know how much people care.
Oh, I think people care about the Iraq war. Trump ran partly on saying that he was against it. Like, people have lost their taste for empire in general, and the Iraq war is largely considered to be a mistake.
I think
But Donald Trump also, when he contemporaneously was for the Iraq war. I mean, so that's my point, is that like, well, at least now he's saying the right thing. It's annoying. I just, I would.
it'd be nice if we didn't have all the fake candidates distracting from these actual issues with Biden for the last 8 months. But
It would have been nice, I mean, look, if you're going to interview the guy and the guy's going to make that claim, if you're going to ask the question, know the answer, is what I would say.